In this lecture, I want to talk about how we can go beyond the canvas in P5js. And what I mean by that is, well, so far in the semester, basically, when we've drawn lovely little graphics or made shapes of flowers or snowman that you can hit with a snowball or drawn text to the screen or made music visualizations, that's all happened inside the little canvas that we create. That small square, or large if we make it large, that's just one part of a web page. The canvas is just actually an element on a web page. And one of the great things about P5js as a creative platform is that it runs on the web. And so we can connect it to other parts of the web page and even to other websites, other web services, and get data from that and visualize that in interesting ways. So that's really what the topic of this lecture is. How can we go beyond the canvas and start looking out to other parts of the web? I'll probably split this lecture into two big chunks. First, I'm going to talk about working with the DOM in P5js. And the DOM is just an acronym for Document Object Model. And really what that means is it's the way that a web page is represented in JavaScript. So how can we, from JavaScript, interact with, get data out of, or manipulate the rest of the web page that it's running on? That's the topic of the first part. And in the second part, I'm going to look at connecting to external APIs. And an API, that's another acronym for Application Programming Interface. All that really means is it's a way for one computer program to talk to another. So in our case, it's going to be the computer program, the little JavaScript program that you write for the browser, talking to a web server, getting some data from that, and then displaying it back on the web page. Before I start, I just wanted to show this nice little sketch that Ben Carden, one of our tutors, created. Let me find it here. Oops, here it goes. So he made a sketch called Shapes into Code where you can, if you go to this link, you can click here to draw different shapes and then place them on a sort of a canvas. Like here I'm drawing an ellipse. I choose the width, I choose the height, and then places that ellipse on the canvas, but it also generates the P5js code for me to actually draw that in my own canvas. So I think that's really nice. You can also do rectangles, click and drag to draw a rectangle, and triangles as well. So I think that's a nice concept for a sketch, and maybe you could play around with this and develop it further, or even just use it as a tool to generate the P5js code to draw some simple graphical illustrations. Okay, so let's get stuck into the DOM. So I've talked before in the lecture, in the unit, about the three parts of the web, of being HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. HTML, an acronym, stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it really describes the content of a web page. So if you were to visit the New York Times website and read an article there, all of the text from that article, the headings, what images the article includes, that is specified in the HTML for that web page. The CSS is the next part, and that really defines the way that a web page looks, how it's presented to a user. CSS, another acronym, stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And again, to sort of think about that New York Times web page, the CSS would be defining what color the background of the page is, what color the text is, how big the headings are, what fonts they use, how the images fit in with the rest of the text. All of that sort of stuff is usually defined by CSS. And if you've done some of the introductory units here at QT, where you look at introduction to web design and introduction to web programming, you've probably come across HTML and CSS. And JavaScript is really the last piece of that puzzle, and one way to think about that is that JavaScript adds behavior to your web page. So not just the static content or how it looks statically although you can do animations in CSS as well, but JavaScript is really doing user input, changing things around, making it dynamic. And I found this nice little kind of website that has a sort of an illustration of this concept. So here you've got HTML, which is the sort of boring blocky bit. It's got the content, but it's really just it's all serious. There's nothing playful about that. And if you've seen a really old style HTML page where it's just black text on a white background with blue links and everything's lined up on the left, that's pretty much what HTML looks like without any style added to it. Once you add a little bit of CSS, it starts to look a bit friendlier. You can change the background, make the fonts look more appropriate for the content of your site. And when you add JavaScript to the mix as well, then it can get really interactive. Suddenly users can click on your web page and move things around. We can push the content around, make it dynamic, even like totally change the content that's on the page. So I think this is a nice way to think about those three parts of HTML and CSS, and HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all working together. Each part has its own job to do, the content, the presentation, and the behavior, and when we bring them all together, we get this really quite wonderful creative platform. So at the start, I talked about this acronym, the DOM, right? So what's the DOM? Well, it's the Document Object Model, and really it's how an HTML page is represented in JavaScript. Now, I'll actually just switch to my browser and go to a web page. Well, we were just here on this one, so why don't I try looking at the DOM on this page. So when I'm on any web page in modern browsers, you can open up the web inspector. Usually that's F12 or Option Command I. It might be different on your browser. But when you've got this web inspector, you can do things like, if I click here, I click on the elements, I can see the HTML markup that creates the page that we're seeing here. So I can see that this page has all these tags, like the things inside the angle brackets are called tags. So I've got an HTML tag, a head tag, a body tag, and then another tag here called a div. And if I click inside that, I can see there's other tabs inside that, and so on. And I've also got this tool here where I can like scroll over the page, and if I look at that one there, that headline, that's in a paragraph, a P tag, and there I can see the kind of raw content that's added to the page through HTML. Then there's also the styles. So down the bottom here, I can see all of the styles from the CSS that are applied to the page. So again, like if I take just that bit of text there, it's got an alignment, it's got a font size, and in the inspector I can actually change that. So if I make the font size bigger, you can see it gets bigger in the page there. And then the last part, the JavaScript, usually you can see this in the Sources tab. And it'll list all of the JavaScript files that have been added. And on most websites on the web, you'll see lots from like ad services, trackers, and all sorts of things in there. But the basic parts of the page will normally be either in the head of the page or it'll be listed somewhere here. The last part I want to show you here is if I go to the console. So in the Elements part, I could click through and expand and close these tabs. That's sort of looking at the HTML directly, but through the console I can kind of see a JavaScript view of what that looks like as well. So I'll just clear that, and if I type in here window, that's actually a JavaScript object in the browser that represents the current page that's being shown. And it has a property called the document. So if I say window.document, I get this other object, which is the document that's being shown. And then if I go into that document even further, I can say document.head. And that gives me that head tag that's inside the document. And then inside the document, see here there's a title. can also type window.document.head.title. And this page doesn't actually have a title. But I'm getting the value of what the title of this would be there if they had put that into the markup. I can also go window.document.body.children. And it will give me a list, an HTML collection, just an array really, of all of the children that are inside that document. And I could go into them and get their children as well. So you can see I have this way through JavaScript. What I'm typing here is just plain old JavaScript. I have a way of going into the content of the page. And I can do lots of stuff once I have that link. I can add user interaction elements. I can get content out of the page. I can change content. I can change styles. So that's the DOM. The DOM is this way for JavaScript to access the page. And the illustration here, the diagram on the left, sort of shows this notion that the way we represent an HTML page is in this kind of hierarchical tree structure. So we start with a document node right at the top, and inside that there's a root element which is the HTML tag, and then inside the HTML tag there's a head tag and a body tag. Inside the head there's a title, and then inside the body there might be a heading or some paragraphs. And this sort of arbitrary amount of content, and in each part there can also be nested further down like anchors and then text inside of that. So using this kind of model, that's how we get content out of the page. P5js provides us with the DOM library to make this easier. And actually, if you do any JavaScript programming in your future careers, what you'll find is that most JavaScript programming is really concerned with, generally, most of it is concerned with how do we interact with the DOM, because it's quite a complicated area to interact with, mainly because there's so many different browsers and each one has its own slightly different way of doing things. So a lot of JavaScript frameworks that you'll use, their main purpose is actually to smooth out those differences and make things quicker and more efficient for you as a creative coder. And P5js has this P5 DOM library, which is its contribution to making it easier to work with the DOM. So let's just check that out quickly. If I go to p5js.org libraries, you can see here it's listed at the top, P5 DOM. And if you click into the reference, you'll get like the list of all of the functions that are available. But what I would recommend is also click through to this tutorial beyond the canvas, because that takes you through the library in some depth, and you'll get to see more about how it works, how you can actually interact with the DOM. And there's more covered in this tutorial than I will do right now. So yeah, that's well worth checking out. I'm just going to leave the reference up there because I may need that later for my demo. And so I'm going to be using the P5 DOM library, and what I want to do basically is create a Wordle. So if you haven't heard of it before, a Wordle was a sort of a simple visualization of word frequency in bodies of text. So basically what you would do is go to some website, I don't know, wordle.net or something, and upload a document or some text, and it would go through and count up the number of times each word appeared, and then kind of generate this sort of cloud of words. And you can see some words are larger than the other, like so here Wordle is really big, but like loud and free, if I can point to that, loud and free is smaller. That means basically that the word Wordle, or the word text, occurred more in the original text that was uploaded for this Wordle than the word anyone or voila. Okay? So we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to create a web page that has some text in it. I'm going to, with the P5 DOM library, I'm going to go into that web page and get all of the words out of it. I'm going to count them up, and then I'm going to draw a simple Wordle visualization. So here's the web page that I've started with, and I've done a little bit of work before we began. Basically what I did was I went to the Wikipedia page for Ada Lovelace, who was an amazing pioneer of computer science with an incredibly interesting life and background. I've just copied the text from these first few paragraphs of her Wikipedia page, and in my P5js sketch I've gone into the index.html page, and I've pasted them in as HTML markup. So I've just made, this is a P tag, a paragraph tag. I've just made each of those first few paragraphs of her Wikipedia page into paragraph tags here. So I've removed all of the links. I've removed some of the other markup just to make it a little bit simpler for us to use here. But what that means is once we run the text, you can see here on the left, I get that HTML content shown in my sketch. And I also did a little bit to the style, like I changed the background color to white, the foreground color to black, and in the sketch.js, I'm also still just creating a canvas. You'll see the canvas comes down here at the end of the sketch. Okay, so basically what I want to do in this demo is, using the DOM, I want to go into my HTML document, into the body, into the div where this content is, and then into each of the paragraphs and get all of the text that's in them, and then mush it all together, separate out all the words, count them up, and then return that and visualize that in my canvas. So let's work through that. Okay, so the first thing is, I'm just going to close, well, I might leave that that project folder open so we can refer back to it. The first thing I want to point out is that when we just, by default, when we create the canvas on line 2 there, it just gets added to the bottom of the HTML page. So you can see here, you know, I've got my page, the canvas comes right down here at the bottom. And actually, if I just copy and paste this page again, and I'll make a smaller canvas, what you'll see is that when I run it, I'll just get a second canvas underneath it. Actually, I need to say let B equals, let A equals, oh, I only get one. Okay, I didn't realize that, so I only get one canvas. I'm just going to backtrack a bit. Ignore that. That was a sidetrack, which wasn't really useful to explain something to you. What I want to do, this is what I want to do, is not have the canvas at the end of the page. I want to have it up at the top of the page, because you know this is my Wordle demo, and I want the Wordle to be at the top, and then the content that it's based on underneath. So ideally, I would like to place my Wordle just here, just after it says this is a demo of making a Wordle. I'll have the canvas drawn there, and then the content from the Wikipedia page can come after. So what I need to do that, and that is explained here in the Beyond the Canvas tutorial, is I'm going to not just create a canvas, but actually store it in a variable, and then I'm going to set its what its parent element is. So if I go back to my web editor and look at the HTML page, you can see what I've done here is I've actually added a div, and a div is just a kind of a general purpose container for content in HTML. So I use this div tag, I give it an ID, so I say ID equals CNV, in this case for canvas, and I'm going to add my canvas in there. So I'll show you how to do that first. Go back to the sketch, I'm going to say let's see equals create canvas. So I store the canvas that I created in a variable, and then I'm going to say let D, this is the container, equals select CNV. That was the ID of that div, remember? And then I say c.parent d. And that places, instead of that canvas just going by default at the bottom of the page, it stores it in the variable and it puts it back up where I told it to, inside that div. Okay, the next thing we want to do is get all of the text content out of those paragraph elements. So I can use another function from the P5 DOM library to select all of the elements that I know the content is inside these elements. So it's going to be let paras for paragraphs equals select all P. And I'm just going to console log what we get from that. So you can see here I get this little array, and if I expand that out and open it up, you can see each one is this ELT. ELT stands for element, and you can see there the markup, it says P. This is a demo of making a Wordle. That's the first paragraph there, right? I open up the next one, ELT, it's another paragraph, and there we've got the first paragraph of my actual content. And the next one, that's the second paragraph of the content. So I've got this content into an array of paragraphs, but there's a slight problem, and that is that I'm also selecting this first paragraph. So there's a number of ways in JavaScript that you can specify which element you want to select. And if you've done CSS, this will be a little bit familiar. In CSS, you can use the class or an ID of an element or its tag name to tell which one to select, or where it sits within the hierarchy of the document. So if it's a child of a certain element, you can use all of those things to specify what you want to select. And in my case, what I've done is, in the markup, I've actually put all of the content inside a div with the ID Ada content. So I'm going to use that to specify my selection. So in sketch.js, I'm not just going to select all the paragraphs. I'm going to select all the paragraphs that are inside this ID Ada content. So if I run that again, it should exclude that first paragraph. So now I only have 6 paragraphs, and the first one is indeed the first of a content. Okay, so next let's actually get the text out of those paragraphs. And the way that I can do that, I'll just show you here on the console first. I can say this paras is just a straight old array, a plain old array. If I get the first element out of the paragraphs, that's this first paragraph object. It's an element object. If I go paras0.html, that's a function provided by P5js that just returns the raw HTML content inside that tag. So inside that element. So here, when I log that, I just get the text. Now you want to be a little bit careful here, because if I go back to my index.html, and if, for instance, I had some other tags inside that, like maybe I made the first part of that sentence bold with the B tag, when I run my sketch, if you look at it, it has that bold tag sort of just written in there. So it's not just the raw text, it includes the HTML markup. So that was why I was a little bit careful here, and I removed all of the HTML markup from my content, just for the purposes of this demonstration. So sometimes you have to kind of manually strip out these tags. There are also libraries that help you get the raw text that you can search online for. In our case, I've just taken it away so I don't have to deal with that problem for this simple demo. So I go back to the sketch. Now what I'm going to do is actually go through that array of paragraphs get each of the texts of each paragraph out and mush it all together in one long string. So I'm going to say let word string, I'll call it text, equals just a blank array. And then I'm going to say for P of paras, for each paragraph of the paras, and I should say for let P of paras. I'm going to loop over them, and I'm going to say text. Now text is not going to be an array, it's just going to be an empty string. And I'm going to add the HTML of each paragraph onto the end of it, p.html. And here, I'm going to just console log the text to see that it looks right. Okay, so we get all of the text in one long string. Okay, so we're almost there. I'm going to now, I've made a function that does the job of sorting out my string of text into the word counts. You can have a look through this and see if you can figure out how it works. I didn't want to spend this whole tutorial going through and making that function. That's why I've just done it ahead of time. But basically what it does, it takes a string of text, it splits it up on anything that's not a letter or a number, which is what this line of code does. It makes an array, a hash, like a JavaScript object of, it's kind of like a dictionary of words and how many times each word has been found. That happens here. Then we make an array which has kind of ordered pairs of each word and how often it was found, and we sort that according to the frequency. So the words with the most occurrences come first, and then I just return that. And this other function is a sorting function. So in JavaScript you can sort any array if you give it a function for sorting it. So that's what's happening here. Like I said, I didn't want to go into all of the detail of that. There are some more advanced things here. The main point of this demo is just to show interacting with the DOMs, so I don't want to get too sidetracked by that. But feel free to dig in and see if you can figure out how that's all working. Okay, so basically what I want, I've got all of my text. What I'm going to do now is just say let word counts equals, and the name of my function was split words. Actually, a better name for this function would be get counts. Get the counts, or yeah. Get occurrences, maybe. So get all of the occurrences of each individual word out of that text that we sent it. And then I'm going to log the word counts to the console. So we get this long array because there's quite a lot of words here, and it should be sorted according to which is the most frequent word. So what word do you think that's going to be? Right, the, very common word in the English language. Of, her, and so on. So, and then, as we go down, proposed. So most of these words only occur once. All right, so next thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to now draw this to the canvas. I'll do that in the draw function. And really what that means is I should make the word counts variable a global variable, so it's accessible in the draw function. So I'll say let word counts. And in the draw function, I'm going to say for let WC for word count of word counts. I'm just going to draw that text to the screen. So, it might actually be better here if I say for let, I'll just use an iterator like I equals 0, I is less than word counts dot length I plus plus. And I'll say WC equals word counts I. And then I'm going to say, I'll make another variable here for where it should be drawn on the screen. So let text y equals 0. So I want to change the size of each word depending on how frequent it is. So I'll make a variable called text h for text height. So the text height is going to be equal to WC. So the first item is the word. So let's say let word equals WC 0, and let count, that's the second element in the array, WC 1. So the text height is going to be dependent on the count. So I'm going to say text height equals count times 20, maybe 10. Times 2. Let's try that. And I'm going to say text size text h. I'm going to have another variable called text top, and that's going to start off at 10. That should actually be the text bottom. So text bottom is going to go down each time according to how high each piece of text is. So it's going to have text h added to it. And then I'm going to say text word at, I'll just draw them down the left-hand margin at the moment. So I'll draw them all at 20 pixels from the left and at text b from the top. Let's run that and see what we get. So we've got, yeah, indeed, the words are going down in size. So there's a lot I think we could improve here. I probably will leave it there. You know, maybe I could leave it as an exercise for you to think about how you could lay these words out on the screen, change the color so that it gets closer to that original Wordle idea. But basically what we've shown here is going into the content of the web page that you're on, getting some data out and then manipulating it to produce a visual output. You know, other things you could think of, should we filter out words like the, of, to, in, and really focus on the words like her and Ada, was, you know, the first. Things like that might be more significant to focus on. Right, so I'll leave this demo there. I'll come back for the second part where we'll look at connecting to an API.